So, by way of motivation, I'd like to read first a quote from Lama Tsongkhapa, which is quite inspiring and points to this topic, and we'll talk about it later. Lama Tsongkhapa said that ethical discipline is water to clean away the stains of negativity, moonlight to cool the heat of afflictions, radiance towering like a mountain in the midst of sentient beings, the force peacefully to unite humankind. Knowing this, the spiritual practitioners guard it as they would their very eyes. So this morning we had the opportunity to take the Mahayana precepts, and now we have the opportunity to increase our understanding about them. And so with a very, a lot of joy at having this opportunity to take the precepts. Let's listen and learn from each other, and do this so that we can develop all of our good qualities. And we do this because we're aware of our own suffering, we're aware of the suffering of others, and we wish to be of the greatest benefit to relieving suffering. Okay, so we've had a few questions already about these precepts, but maybe some more will come up, and feel free at any time to ask questions. These precepts are taken for 24 hours, and usually we take them, traditionally they're taken before dawn, and they last until, and before dawn means you can't see the lines in your hand. When you look at your palm, you can't see the lines yet. And they last until the next morning when it's light enough that you can see the lines in your palm. That's the traditional way. Because of our latitude, after a few years of doing that, we were getting up like 3 in the morning in the summer. And we'll finally decided it was better just to kind of set a time, because we're not in India, not at their latitude, so. But that's the traditional thing, and they're often taken on the full and the new moon, at least in the Tibetan tradition. I'm not sure about other traditions, I'm not sure if the Chinese tradition does that. And the reason that is because the new and the full moon is the time where monastics and lay people as well can renew their precepts. And so we'll be doing that tonight. These precepts are often also taken on Buddhist holidays, which we do here, and I've also seen them. And people also take them more than just for one day. Sometimes they'll do a number of days together, and when we do retreats, sometimes people will take the Mahayana precepts for part or all of a retreat. So they're, I think, very inspirational and kind of easy, very easy way to create a lot of merit. And last night I read this really skinny book that's about these precepts, and what it made me really understand was just that because they use these analogies or these examples of like how much merit you generate by doing this kind of, doesn't seem like so much to me, I think because we hold these vows already, and when you're here, I think it might be a lot harder if you're not here and at home, going to work and dealing with all things. But it seems like so easy to take these precepts. But even in our situation here, which is so conducive, anytime someone holds precepts, they say it's more, they give some examples like making huge amounts of offerings to Buddhas and that this is more meritorious. And it points to that situation of that we live in a degenerate time. And so that holding precepts, even holding one precept, they say even holding it for an hour, is very beneficial. And they also told a story which I had forgotten about, is like there are some times where people have been allowed to take the precepts for less than 24 hours, and they gave the examples of a butcher and a prostitute who their trade is killing and having sex. And so they allowed them to take them for 12 hours, and there was this long discussion, in the book about it's so beneficial to hold them for 12 hours, for 1 hour. And then they also talked about if you break a precept, don't just give it up, for the day kind of thing. There's ways to restore it, and we'll talk about that. But you want to have, just having that mind, I think, that really wants to guard our actions. And really the whole purpose of precepts are like trainings and guidelines, and we hold them that way here. Venerable often says if you could keep all these precepts, you wouldn't need them. So we have that attitude here. We don't take it so much as like in a legalistic way, or even sometimes even in a literal way. We take them as a training, and that's how we go about it. So we're trying to train our body, our speech, and our mind. And by taking precepts, you can see how it gives you that little extra bit of strength and energy, because you've set a clear intention, and that helps to carry through with your actions. And so why can we set that intention? Well, really, we've looked at the things that we're abandoning for the day, and we've had some understanding about them, and we've decided, wow, these things really do bring suffering. They aren't wholesome, and we want to abandon, we don't want to act in certain ways. And so I think it's really through that understanding that we find, and for myself personally, I always have to kind of find the harm in an activity, a thought or a behavior or anything. I have to see the harm to want to abandon it. So seeing the suffering that you're causing yourself or others, this is kind of the mindset that we take precepts in. And so they then say that precepts are the ornaments of the wise. And I think that oftentimes when they describe the different jewels that you see in some of the art and some of the tankas and whatever, they're often talking about these are representing precepts and things like that. So one area where I have some questions still, and I didn't have a chance to clarify this completely with Venerable, even though I've done this before, but I can't keep it straight in my mind. But it's important to understand this is a Mahayana precept ceremony. In the Buddhist canon, there's the Pratimoksha Sutra, and that's the sutra that explains the monastics' vows, like the monks and the nuns. And there are 8 kinds of ordination that are spoken of in that canon. And so there are fully ordained monks, fully ordained nuns. There are novice monks and novice nuns. So we have the bhikkhu, bhikshuni, shramanera, and shramanarika. That's those first 4. And then there's also a probationary nun, which is a 2-year training called a sikshamana. So that's 5 ordinations. And then there's the lay man and the lay woman, the upasaka and the upasika, those who have taken refuge and taken some or all of the vows, the 5 precepts. And then there's a 1-day vow with 8 precepts. And this ceremony is actually different from that, but where I get confused is that the precepts are the same. So if I'm clear on this, and I really think we might need to double check this, the Mahayana, at least in the book I read last night, this Mahayana precept ceremony comes from a tantra, and those precepts of individual liberation are from the Pratimoksha Sutra and from that canon. So basically the point is this: the main important thing is that our motivation, when we take refuge, when we take our monastic ordinations, those are individual liberation vows. That's the motivation. You want to be liberated from nirvana, from samsara, to attain nirvana. When we take the Mahayana, and so then, as a, like say as a monastic, I never take the lay precepts again. Okay? And I think from what I read last night, you can't take that 8-day vow necessarily. But anyone, even a person who's a high lama, can take these Mahayana precepts. They're taken with a completely different motivation. It's the Mahayana motivation. We're trying to, get our bodhicitta really strengthened by doing this. And so that's the main take-home message, is that this ceremony, the motivation is for the Mahayana, having a mind of bodhicitta. And although many people, when they take their monastic ordination and even their lay ordination, they have the sense of being in the Mahayana tradition, the actual main motivation that's described is for liberation. But you can certainly hold both. No problem there. Okay, and then in our book where it describes this, it talks about the various benefits, and I'll just read what it has from the book. First, one accumulates a great amount of merit in a short time, and you'll receive upper rebirth and eventually attain awakening. You're protected from harm, and the place where you live becomes peaceful and prosperous. Our mind is peaceful and calm, and we gain control over our bad habits. And this also helps us to have fewer distractions when meditating. We get along better with others, and one day we'll meet the Buddha's teachings. We will meet the Buddha's teachings in the future and can be born as a disciple of Maitreya Buddha, which is the future Buddha. So these benefits, they clearly relate, they're like, in a way, results. They relate to the practice, to what you're doing when you take the precepts. And so when you think about it, let's talk about the precepts, and then we can see how these benefits might occur. So there are 8 precepts. The 5 lay precepts are the same: avoiding killing, avoiding stealing. In this particular day, you have, instead of a precept of sexual misconduct, you have a precept of celibacy, so that's different from the lay ordination. And then avoiding lying, avoiding intoxicants, so those are the same. And then the other 3 that are taken for this day are: we avoid eating at improper times, and we'll talk about each of these. We avoid sitting on high, expensive beds or thrones or chairs or anything with pride. And we avoid wearing jewelry, perfume, makeup, singing, dancing, playing instruments and such. And so let's talk a little bit about each of these 4. In particular, Venerable had a few points she wanted us to be clear on. That there are 8 precepts we're talking about. The first 4 are naturally negative. Pretty much all religious traditions hold that killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, and lying are negative actions. So those are naturally negative. But the other 4, intoxicants, singing, dancing, eating at different times of day, and things like that, those are not naturally negative. Those are things that are like we're prohibiting ourselves from doing by taking the precepts. And so there's a distinction there between something that's naturally negative. For example, whether you held a precept or not to kill, you would create karma of killing if you kill. But if you sing, you're not necessarily creating an unwholesome, destructive karma, right? It would all depend on your motivation. But killing is generally considered naturally negative, as are the others. But when you hold a precept, there's this additional, both, you can kind of look at it 2 ways. There's a great benefit in holding a precept, because even when I'm asleep, even when my practice isn't going so well, I'm living by precepts, and that's a very meritorious thing. So some of these ones that are not naturally negative, but they're things that we are prohibiting ourselves from doing, refraining from, there's a kind of merit that's being generated even when you're not even thinking about it. Whereas the issue with karma is a little bit different. You have to do, an action to create. Karma means action. So there's a little bit of a distinction there. Is that clear? Does that make sense? I'm getting that point. So the first four that are naturally negative, let's talk about a little bit. So avoiding killing. And this is avoiding killing either directly or indirectly. If you were to instruct somebody to kill someone, that's still the same. It carries the same. You would break this precept. And so when we, tonight, when we renew our vows, the lay vows says, from my own experience and examination, I know that harming others, specifically taking their lives, harms myself and others. Therefore, I undertake to protect life and to avoid killing. By my doing this, all beings will feel safe around me, and peace in the world will be enhanced. So you can see there both the restraint and the benefit. And it's very clear that if everyone in the world held that first precept for any period of time, there would be quite a change. The whole nightly news would be different, and we'd feel safer. You could walk, if people weren't harming each other, you could walk anywhere, anytime, right? So with that, with that particular precept, when we take this, we're talking about not killing any living being. But to actually break this precept from the root, it would mean killing a human. Okay? Now the second one is avoiding stealing and taking things without the permission of their owner. And this is kind of an important point. A lot of times when you hear this, you'll say, it's said something like, taking things that haven't been offered. And that's a little more firm than what we usually think about stealing. Usually kind of stealing is, you're taking something that isn't yours, but it also means things that haven't been offered. So in our precepts, a blade of grass is written in there. So you just kind of don't go beach combing. We don't go beach combing. Our precepts say don't even steal a blade of grass, right? Because that has never been offered. So there's this whole distinction of having an owner, whether something has an owner or not. So basically, it's good, I think, to think of it that way. Has this been offered to me? It keeps us a lot safer to think about it that way. Because then you don't have any question. Like, I remember when I took my novice ordination, I had found a little Walkman headset in a park. And I remember, you want to just be so clean when you take an ordination. And I just, while they were translating the ceremony and powwowing for 8 hours that day, I was like reviewing things and coming out every once in a while and asking Venerable, like, well, what about this? To make sure I had confessed everything and purified everything. And I know that I had stolen stuff before I moved to the Abbey, and I got rid of anything. I didn't bring anything here, like especially medical supplies that I had pilfered over the years, because I was of that mindset that wasn't really stealing. They owed it to me. So around stealing, we have a lot to look at. What is stealing? And so, when you take an ordination, you want that feeling of being kind of anew, refreshed, clean. And so I remember talking to her about those headphones, and I gave them away. She said, well, it probably wouldn't have been better. And I know that's true because one time we were looking at construction sites, and this is when I held the ordination. And there was a piece of siding that was like trash on the ground at this house that they were working on. We were going to look at this house, and I picked up this little piece of siding as a sample to bring back. And Venerable didn't say anything, but I was with her, and then we got in the car, and I'm like, should I have left that there? And she said yes. So this is kind of the level that we train ourselves to hold things. But to break this from the root, where you actually have lost the precept, that means that you've stolen something. Well, there's a kind of a technical argument about it, or not argument. There's things of value are different depending on the country. So when they wrote this, it was like 5 coins of a certain value in India at that time. But what does that mean now? We don't even have that currency. So, or if you say 10 sticks of incense. Well, in one country incense is precious, in another country it's not. So you can't, that makes it difficult. So what we use here and is common is if it would get you in trouble with the law, you've broken it from the root. That's one way it's held at this point in time. And another, I think they say so many gold coins. Well, you know the value of coins. Gold goes up and down, you know, put a monetary value on it. So that's how we hold it. So basically, you know, that would break it from the root to steal something of such value that you would get arrested. And then avoiding sexual contact. With that one, when we take the lay precept, it says, from my own experience and examination, I know that engaging in unwise sexual behavior harms myself and others. Therefore, I undertake to respect my own and others' body, to use my sexuality wisely and kindly, to avoid sexual expression which could harm others or myself physically or mentally. Why am I doing this? All people will be able to relate to me honestly and with trust, and mutual respect among people will ensue. So this helps us to see the benefits, both of not having sexual misconduct and of holding celibacy. You just drop so many games, and people feel safer around you. You're not on the make, you know, you're not having that kind of energy in any interaction, and it creates a way of being able to be more connected with people on a different level. So I think the thing is to think about in this one is respect. And to break this one from the root, it basically it's having sex, essentially, having intercourse. And we'll talk about these a little bit further about the different aspects of breaking something fully, but that's the basic thing. And then avoiding lying and deceiving others. Okay, so lying has kind of different shades to it also, like stealing does, right? And so I think that when you have the idea of deception in your mind, you've pretty much gone into the area of a lie, right? But in terms of let's read this verse again, because I think it helps us see the benefits. From my own experience and examination, I know that saying untrue things for the sake of personal gain harms myself and others. So we can see the harm. Most of us are aware that you feel quite betrayed when people lie to you. It's very harmful. And it takes a long time to trust people again. There's a harm there. Therefore, I undertake to speak truthfully and to avoid lying and deceiving others. By my doing this, all beings can trust my words, and friendship among people will increase. I think most of us know this from our own experience. It doesn't need a lot of explanation. The root downfall there is to lie about spiritual attainments. So you lose this precept when you lie about spiritual attainments. And why would that be? Because that is really harmful. That is a kind of betrayal of trust that kind of undermines, I think I would have to say, a lot of hope in another person. And it's not good to destroy people's hope. You know, when I took full ordination, one of the guidelines they had that the master had to do with this, not ever to destroy another person's hope. And so if you lie about your spiritual attainments, it's really undermining in a way that goes quite deep and can cause a lot of harm. So, and then how do you know to trust what a person says then? And they're helping you, you know, you're either Dharma friends or spiritual teachers or whatever. The whole thing gets completely undermined. Okay, and then we move into the next four. And the first one, avoiding intoxicants, alcohol, tobacco, recreational drugs. So this is again a situation where if you have prescription drugs and you're taking them as prescribed, that wouldn't be breaking this precept. And so the lay ordination, or the lay ceremony says, from my own experience and examination, I know that taking intoxicants harms myself and others. Therefore, I undertake to avoid taking intoxicating substances. alcohol, recreational drugs, and tobacco, and to keep my body and environment clean. By doing this, my mindfulness and introspective alertness will increase. My mind will be clear, my actions will be thoughtful and considerate. And anyone who's been drunk knows that these things go out the window. And I remember when I did training to adopt my nephew, the foster care thing, there was a lot of teaching around different substances, and I was never aware until then what the problems were with smoking pot in terms of being a parent. And it's that you tend to neglect your kids because you're just spaced out. You're not there for them. And so this is what happens with our mind, when we take, although they're not naturally negative, it leads to all the negative behaviors. And so it's really, it sets a condition where you can break all your other precepts and things like that. And you won't, your meditation, people who have taken a lot of drugs, they have, their mind takes years to clear out. I've known, my high school boyfriend took a lot of LSD, and I talked to him years later, and it took years for his mind to kind of clear out. I met a lot of people who did that when I was young, and they were like, they could hardly think straight, to boil a cup of water. I mean, one guy I knew, he went off hitchhiking in the middle of winter without a winter coat. He was so out of it. It's not so clear, right? Not so alert. Okay, so we can see that even from minor amounts, which is why we don't do caffeine here, because it has an effect. And I think people here who drink a lot of tea notice an impact too. So you have to be careful even with things that are allowed. How you're using things, chocolate, the same, it can buzz you up. But I don't think you lose the same kind of clarity. I don't know so much, I never drank much coffee. I just think people get really unhealthy and heart problems and tired. Yeah, agitation. They have a lot of physical problems from too much coffee. Okay, and then the sixth one is avoiding eating at improper times. And so as monastics, if we can hold this precept strictly, we eat between sunrise and noon. Many people don't, their health doesn't allow that, but even those of us who have eat medicine meal here and don't just have liquids for dinner hold this precept on this day. And so this precept is held differently in different places. Here and in the book I just read, it was held as, well, no, that's not true. Here we hold it as one meal a day, and we just have liquids for breakfast and at dinner. In the book they talk about, it was the same as for monastics, where you have breakfast and lunch. And that's, I think, how it's held with Lama Zopa's organization, and how Venerable probably initially learned it, maybe too. No?
No, she learned, I don't know about Zopa too. She got it from Lama Yeshe.
Yeah, Lama Yeshe. Exactly, she does it how Lama Yeshe taught it, but I think Lama Zopa holds it differently, and in the book which is by him, it's described that way. So anyway, here, what it means is that, as you can see at breakfast, we have certain kinds of liquids, no pulp and juice, and we mix water, at least half or more, with any kind of soy milk or anything like that. We also, for the whole day, we avoid eating meat, chicken, fish, eggs, so you have to be careful, like with cookies and a lot of things, we have to look at the boxes and make sure they don't have eggs in them. We also avoid onions, garlic, and radishes. Okay, and also on this particular day, we, because of our time zone and everything, we make sure we're finished eating by 1 o'clock. And so we actually start our lunch a little bit early today. We'll have lunch at 11:45 instead of 12. And then the seventh one is avoid sitting on high and expensive beds or seats with pride. This goes back, I think, to the time of the Buddha, where the only people who had higher expensive beds or seats were like royalty or something. And so where we translate that into the modern times is if you're walking into a room, you don't want to take the chair or the seat that's in the position of kind of feeling like you're the center of attention or something, anything that would make you have any kind of pride. And also they say to avoid sitting on animal skins, which we won't have any difficulty with here. So the 8th one is to avoid jewelry, perfume, makeup, singing, dancing, playing music with attachment. And so all of these are things that are, well, the first 3, jewelry, perfume, and makeup, are just really not necessary. All of those are things that are more related to attracting others sexually, and we're kind of putting that all aside. Singing, dancing, or playing music with attachment. So if you were to do these precepts when you weren't here, in your home environment, you would avoid those. And for myself, because music was a big part of my life, I realized I wouldn't, for years anyway, be able to discern when I was doing that with attachment and when I wasn't. So I wouldn't have done them. Here we don't. We hold that fairly strictly. And so chanting is fine. Things for a religious purpose are fine. Okay, are there any questions so far? Good. Keep going. Okay, so Venerable wants us to learn about how a precept is broken completely. And this is in the Blue Pearl of Wisdom book. There are 4 main aspects, and some of them have little 2 parts to them. But basically, the first is that the motivation is destructive. It has a destructive attitude. I'm reading exactly from the book for this first part. The motivation is a destructive attitude such as attachment or anger. The second is that there's an object of the action, that a being is killed or an object is stolen. The third is that one does an action, like if someone tells someone to kill, lie, steal, it's also a transgression, or if you do it yourself. And the fourth, the action is completed, which for like killing means that the being dies before you do. Or you think, if you steal something, when you get to the point where you think, this is mine. So we're going to talk about this a little more in depth for a few of them. And we'll start with killing. Because it's very helpful to understand these precepts, because, actually it's not that easy to avoid killing. When I'm working outside, I'm like, what did I do the other day? A spider. I was just in the house, and I gotten so used to cleaning up ants. And ants are kind of hardy. And you can kind of pick them up in a certain way, but certain creatures are not so hardy, and you can't pick them up in the same way. I killed this spider really unintentionally, but I wasn't being mindful enough. That's usually what it comes to for me. I'm a little careless. Like I'm sweeping the floor, and like I can't see that well. And is that a piece of dirt or is it an insect? And you have to get down and look. And sometimes I'm in the workshop or something. I'm moving too fast. Well, I've slowed down a lot over the years, but that used to happen all the time the first few years I was here. And so, it's not that easy to avoid killing. And so it's really helpful then, since you're doing these things and you're trying to hold these precepts, to understand the different aspects. Because people have sometimes confusion and feelings of guilt and just a lot of going on about this. And so it's really spelled out quite clearly and helpful to see it. So I think I have this written out a little clearer. Let me find this. Yeah, it's a little clearer on this. Okay, so when we talk about the motivation, that's the first thing listed in our Pearl of Wisdom book. There's kind of 2 parts to that. This having a complete intention. The first is that you have to recognize there's like a discrimination in the motivation. They're both part of that point. You have to discriminate the object. You have to know that you're killing something. If you're walking along and you don't see an ant under your foot, and you kill it, you haven't discriminated that there's an ant there. You have to know that what you're doing. You have to recognize the actual object. And then you have to have this intention to want to kill. And that intention has to be tied in with some kind of affliction, usually one of the three poisons of anger, attachment, and ignorance. And so that's the whole picture that's there for that portion of a complete action, an action that is fully transgressed. So first there's this part with the motivation. So there's the discrimination part, and then there's the actual motivation that you had, including the affliction. Both the intention, I want to kill this being, and then some anger or whatever it is. Could be ignorance, like I think it's like like animal sacrifice. That's a kind of ignorance, I think a wrong view. Okay, so there's that. And then there's the object of the action, which is like the basis of the object. And that's the thing, that there is something there. You can't kill a dream object. There's no object there. So if you kill someone in your dream, you haven't broken your precept of not killing, even if you kill a human in your dream, because there's no human there. There has to be the object. And that's where the kind of gets tricky in your mind sometimes, if when you have these kind of dreams. Whatever they are, stealing, whatever. And then there's the action itself. So for killing, you have to have, do the act or direct someone else to do it. Or even giving someone poison, or, praise, or in our vows, and I think this is true for everyone, if you praise death, or, tell somebody to go have an abortion or this or that, or do euthanasia, this is all, like if you do that in a really forceful way, this is considered breaking this in terms of the action itself. And then there's the action being completed. The person or the being has to die before you die. That's the complete action of killing. All those 4 points, their subpoints, are intact. Okay? And so it's the same for stealing. So in stealing, the object or the basis is there's something that's owned by somebody else, or something that isn't yours. And then you recognize it. So for, they say this always throws me, like in the killing one, for example, if you are trying to kill John and you kill Ted by mistake, that actually isn't a complete action, because you didn't discriminate, right? You didn't kill the person you intended to kill. There's still karma, and there's still, some type of transgression, but it's not a complete transgression of killing, because you didn't kill the object, who you were intending to kill. So the whole thing, like even in our legal system, motivation, the motive is always a huge part. And so it is here as well. So with stealing, it's the same thing. You have to discriminate. There has to be something that you're stealing. And then you have to have the motivation that I want this, and then some kind of affliction, and then the action, you either take it yourself or someone else takes it, and as soon as you lift the last little point of it off, boom, right there, now you've done the action. Right? So like when do you steal somebody's property? Well, it's hard because you haven't moved it. I mean, if it's like land, you steal somebody's land by moving your fence. When is the action? Well, they have kind of definitions of all of this, but basically, when it's complete is when you think it's mine. It's not even when I'm stealing this clock and I lift it off the table, the action's done then, but when it's really complete is when I say, this is mine. And where that really comes up is when you borrow something that you've had in your possession for a few years. When the thought comes to you that this is now mine, now you've really completed that act. At first you might have borrowed it, but now you've moved it you've stolen it, right? So that's why we have these distinctions, because we have all these situations that come up. And then for sexual activity, this is the one I always get confused about. It's quite clear when I look at it on paper. It has to be human, non-human, even an animal. And you want to have sex. You have some kind of affliction in mind, usually attachment. And then you do the action, which is intercourse. And then when it's complete is when the depth of penetration goes at least the depth of a width of your hair. That's when it's complete. Does that make sense? Penetration to the depth of a width of one of your hairs on your head. That's the completion of that action. And pleasure is involved. So that's so you kind of wonder sometimes, when is it? When isn't it? That's when it is. It's complete. Okay, and then killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying. So lying, there's this wish. So the object is. Let me look at this because I might mix it up. The object is the person you're speaking to. You can't really lie and break this by talking to thin air. There has to be a person you're speaking to. And then the intention is that you want to deceive or distort the truth. So that could be something like saying you saw something that you didn't, or saying you didn't see something that you did, or saying you doubted something that you didn't. Things like that all fall into this. And then there's an affliction there, so that goes to the motivation. And then the action is you speak the words, or you even nod your head, you communicate even non-verbally, or you even write the words. And then the completion is the other person has to have received the message. You have to have succeeded in communicating. The other person has to hear and understand. So I'm not sure that you could lie to an insect, because they wouldn't understand. Okay, so for it to be complete action, all these things have to be there. Okay. And then, so those are the first four: killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying. And then, and all of these are also exceptions. And the main one is that you can't be insane at the time. I mean, you have to be within your mind somewhat to do these things. So those are the ways that that a transgression is complete, those 4 points, and those are how you would apply them to the first 4 precepts, which are really the basis of our ethical conduct. Okay. So then, that's how you break them completely. We've done those 4 conditions. And then let's go on to thinking about not only with the intoxicants, but really with all precepts. These help us, they both help us, and we develop our mindfulness and our introspective alertness by holding precepts. When we had our retreat last year, Venerable gave a teaching on this verse from one of these 8 dangers from the Tara book that we have in the house. And this verse says, untamed by the sharp hooks of mindfulness and introspective alertness, dulled by the maddening liquor of sensual pleasures, it enters wrong paths and shows its harmful tusks. The elephant of ignorance, please protect us from this danger. I love that verse because it kind of puts everything together. Untamed by the sharp hooks of mindfulness and introspective alertness. Mindfulness and introspective alertness hook our mind, and they help us when we're doing applying it to ethical conduct. They help us to behave, even act and think in the ways that we want to. They hook the mind. And so in the context of ethical conduct, mindfulness, you have this awareness of your precept or the guidelines, and then that you want to live within because you've understood them. And then you have this introspective awareness or alertness, this little spy inside the mind that's checking once in a while to see, am I doing this? Am I, like when I'm sweeping the floor, if I was doing it mindfully, I would hold more awareness of like, wow, there might be a spider here. I need to be careful. and I'd be kind of checking. But when you get careless, your mindfulness is gone, and these things happen. So that's the great benefit of having mindfulness and this introspective awareness. And then in meditation, we also have those same, by doing this in our daily life, in our ethical conduct, this translates also into our meditation practice, especially when we're working on concentration, because mindfulness there refers to you've determined what the object is that you're placing your mind on, and it's a virtuous object, and you're going to keep your mind on that without distraction. And then the introspective awareness is that little spy that kind of checks up once in a while to see if you're getting too lax or too distracted or too excited. It's checking up to see if you're on the object. So when we talk about mindfulness in both the context of meditation and also in our ethical conduct, we're not just talking about awareness, like I'm aware of everything that's going on. You actually already have chosen, so to speak, the object. You've actually made a determination in your mind. You've taken a precept. So it's something that you're familiar with. It's not just I'm aware that there's a clock here, I have awareness. It's actually I'm aware that I want to keep this precept, and so I'm going to move through my day in a way mindfully that I can do that. So now, with that kind of mental glue, we can go back to this quote and just let it think about what Lama Tsongkhapa said. Ethical discipline is water to clean away the stains of negativity. So we can see how by holding ethical discipline, all these habitual things that we do, we will slowly erode. We're just creating new behaviors, new thoughts, new ways of moving through the world. Moonlight to cool the heat of afflictions. And that's in the sense of like when something arises, when you've been very clear, when you take a precept, your mind is usually quite clear. You've made a determination, you have clarity, you have this understanding. When you then later you're living your life and the affliction comes up, this is like moonlight that cools the afflictions, because just with some thought, turning some attention to like, oh yeah, I've made this determination, I don't want to do this, it actually helps to subdue the affliction, and you can kind of control it better, because you go back to that more, I want to say, wisdom mind, more rational mind that's like already, it's very clear, like, yeah, I may have confusion about this in this moment, but I can go back to this moment of clarity where I knew this is, right now I'm afflicted, and whenever you're afflicted, you're suffering, you're confused, things are distorted, and you can kind of get used to knowing, wow, my mind is distorted now, and you won't follow it so much. And then you just take your mind back, yeah, I had that moment of clarity, I know I made a determination on this, I understood this, and it does help to cool the affliction. And then radiance towering like a mountain in the midst of sentient beings. And this just makes me think of Venerable Children. I think this is what attracted me to her as a teacher, because I had seen a lot, and it was the ethical conduct. There is something that you can really trust in a person who has ethics. There's something there. There's a kind of a consistency, some kind of firmness in the way they're holding themselves and moving through the world. And that kind of thing actually influences the people you're around. And I think this is one reason why we respond to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, because even people who don't know him, there is an influence of having that in your mind stream greater than just your skin. It goes out. And so it has an influence both on the minds of others and the environment. And when I read about this verse here, Venerable Children mentioned that there had been studies done on people in the Holocaust and in the Cultural Revolution who had been like imprisoned or in very, horrible situations. And the people who had very clear ethical standards, their minds were very clear, and they were able to kind of hold some kind of firm foundation that helped them in the midst of all of this chaos, and it helped the people around them. And so I think that's just like the proof of ethical conduct. In the hardest of situations, And we aren't all capable of that, obviously, but we can train ourselves over time to do that. So that's really kind of a wonderful thing to think about. And then the next line is, ethics is the force peacefully to unite humankind. And like we said, if everyone had their precepts together, their mind would have to be more controlled, and all the crazy things that happen in the world would not be the same. This world would not be the same if people held precepts and held them in a way with a great understanding, and you'd have more respect for others. It would be a completely different world. And then the last line, knowing this, spiritual practitioners guard it as they would their very eyes. And so this is the thing of, we guard these because they're like our eyes. We're very careful with our eyes. I'm aware of this now because I'm spraying up there and it's like right in my face, and I'm like, I have to see so I don't destroy the wood, but I can't really close my eyes, but it's like, you really don't like doing that. You're very careful around your eyes. And that's how we have to hold our precepts too, with a lot of care. And we do that not because we should. We're not in that realm at all. There are no shoulds here. We have an understanding here, and we're doing it out of this kind of wisdom that we have, a deep understanding of the value of this. There's no, it's rules, and I should do this, and I should do that. That kind of mindset is not deep enough, I think, to change your behaviors. As soon as somebody's not looking, you're going to go do something. But when you take these things to heart, then they'll stay with you as you make all your mistakes and have to keep changing your habitual patterns. But eventually, things change. Let's see. The last thing I wanted to mention is that those who have now taken this from a spiritual mentor, you can do this on your own, just in front of an image of the Buddha. You can take these, when you go home. Any questions? Yeah.
I have a question about the precept of lying. Not lying. I've heard before different Buddhists who hold that precept, kind of making jokes that are not true.
Right.
And I don't know how specific it is in these precepts, but I know in the teachings in the Bodhisattva vows, it's you specifically says not to lie for a joke. So I was wondering what about that? How do you think of that?
I think it's better to follow that as strictly as you can, because having had that habit, by the way, of kind of teasing people jokingly, and I have to really look at my motivation. So to me, it all comes down to motivation. And so I have a friend that I did this with a lot, and part of it was for her benefit, and part of it was for my benefit. The part was that for her benefit, I think I would hold on to with my bodhisattva vow, but the part that was for my benefit, I would have to completely let go of. And so I think the easiest thing with this is to look at your motivation, because I don't think that in this level of the precept, I don't think they speak so much about joking. It is when you get to I think in the Vinaya code, there might be something there too, although now I'm probably mixing them up. You remember in the Shikshamana if it's in there? Because that's a verbal thing.
But it certainly is in the precept study literature.
Is it? Okay. And there's also the thing about in the Vinaya, you don't take somebody's robes as a joke. It's so you just don't do these kind of things. You can kind of see that those things upset people. Somebody else had a question over here. Yeah.
About stealing, you said after you had borrowed something and you said it was mine, and that was the root. It seems to me there was never a motivation there to steal.
The motivation came along when I decided that I wasn't going to give it back.
What if you forgot you had borrowed it?
Well, that's, then it might not be in full, because you have to have the discrimination, you have to have the motivation, you have to have all of that there. So this is all of these have, this is breaking it fully. There's also partial ways to break all of these things. And we do all of this. We do full, we do part. And that's why it's helpful to know a little bit about this. it makes you feel better, your sense of consciousness, and just kind of understanding your behaviors and looking at them a little clearer. Like, it really makes you kind of tease apart your behaviors, and then you can clean up your act a little easier, because you see, oh wow, I have this tendency to borrow things, and then here they are, I've collected 8 things here that aren't mine. My 32 object I own. 8 of them I really don't.
About giving somebody that had abortion in previous time and wants to become a monastic. And I was reading about there's a list of things that we need to be free of those
Obstructions.
It doesn't talk about abortion, but it talks about one has not killed one's mother and one has not killed one's father. But we all say that all beings have
Right.
killed our mother.
In that thing, it's talking about of this life. Right. And in terms of the other, you should, well, first I would say you should ask Venerable that question. And what I recall from my, I asked Venerable about this that day when I was taking my novice ordination, because I was remembering I had euthanized my cat. And it was around the time that I had taken refuge as a Buddhist. And I was just learning about Buddhism, and I didn't really understand that view, and thought it was the compassionate thing to do, and I could still see a part of my mind that was trying to not have to deal with this, like it was 2% that, and 98 the cat, you know, so there was that portion of my mind that was self-centered in there. And I couldn't remember where it was in relationship to when I took refuge. And so I would ask her about those kind of questions, because she'll be crystal clear on them. And what she told me then, though, is that it related to when you had taken refuge, and also I think for that you have to have killed a human, I believe, not an animal. Yeah, and Angulimala, before he had, well, that was before he had met the Buddha, though, that he killed 999 people. But then there's the thing in relationship to when you take refuge, there's a bit of something that there. If it's before you've taken refuge, you haven't had a precept and you didn't know these things, and people who have done all kinds of horrendous things have become, like Angulimala and others, they've become monastics, they've become arhats. So I think we should, well, we won't have too much of a break here, but let's go ahead.
I'm curious about the monastic vows being for individual liberation. I haven't heard that.
Yeah, I know. I never think of it that way, but that is the case. You know, they're when the Buddha taught them, then they went out to all the different countries. But if you think about it in this way, in the Pali Canon, it's the same. I mean, the Vinaya one Vinaya was taught, and it was taught in the Patimokkha Sutra, which is individual liberation. Yeah. But then, you know, when you take full ordination, for example, many of us we try to go to a dual ordination, which monks and nuns giving it, and a triple platform. And so that the first one you take is you retake your novice ordination, and then you take the bhikshuni ordination, and then you take, and these are all done on different days, then you take the bodhisattva vow, which is, so they have it in the Mahayana tradition, in the Chinese tradition, they have it quite merged, because they do their bodhisattva vow a little bit different for lay people and monastics. And in the Tibetan tradition, the bodhisattva vow is not separated that way.
Just a comment. Back
Yeah, please.
The thing about when stealing, when borrowing becomes stealing, because I really wrestled with this too. But the opposite, virtuous action, is caring for others' property.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you look at it from the positive side,
Yeah.
that the action is caring for others' property, then the fact that we borrow stuff and don't remember is really being very careless with
Yeah.
others' property. So that starts to slide us towards that thing of taking.
That's a very good point. Most of these are the same as the 10 destructive actions and the 10, and then so look at the 10 constructive ones in the Lam Rim, and they help you see the picture more clearly. Protecting others' property, using words that are, you know, speaking the truth, you know. Yeah.
I understand meat and all that. What's up with garlic and onions?
Okay, garlic, onions, and those kind of things are from the Tibet or the Indian culture in ancient India, and even modern day people feel that they are too stimulating and they interfere with meditation. Okay, we better stop because we are only going to have like 10 minutes before the discussion. It's like 4 after 10, and we'll be starting at 10:15. So let's dedicate that we keep our precepts purely today, and if you transgress, forgot to mention this, you say that mantra that we said today, the Dharani of pure morality, the Omamo Gashila, that whole thing, as soon as you can, 3 times. That's according to the book. I've sometimes done it 21 or 7, but the book said 3. So make sure if you happen to transgress one of these things today that you say that and purify to restore your precept. Due to this merit may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.